Welcome to another episode of Twice Told Tales podcast. Today we're pleased to be joined by a guest, Keefi the cat. She's right behind Setareh there, and I'm sure she'll be entertaining us. Our episode today is going to be about the article that was just published by the Gray Zone that Setareh and I wrote, exposing a lot of egregious and very obvious lies and disinformation that have been floating around social media. It's just a small portion of what we could pick out. We have another 10 or so waiting to write about. It's an endless supply of nonsense that people seem convinced of because it triggers them in some emotional way. So I think we'll talk about them. I wanted to bring up like two observations, and then I'll turn it over to you. One is currently, what's happening in Peru is extremely shocking. Not only in the fact that a authoritarian regime is slaughtering protesters on the street with internationally banned munitions, notably dum-dum rounds, which are these exploding bullets that go into you and then explode and rupture all of your organs, or they usually don't even have an exit wound because they fragment into such fine particles inside your body. And they've been banned in warfare because they're just such brutal killing implements. And there's evidence now that the Peruvian government is using them, most likely sourced from America, because the government there is extremely U.S. backed. It's not the democratically elected government was deposed by the current quote unquote president, who was the vice president. And it's the typical politics. I mean, the former president, the ousted president, the democratically elected president was pushing for reforms that would allow for greater control over the country's resources and that threatened the U.S.'s control of those resources. So the U.S. is now supporting a brutal right-wing authoritarian regime that's killing indigenous people who are standing up against this political confiscation of power. And the U.S. media is completely silent on that. But the Iranians, when the Iranian government was protested for a woman who died in their custody on video, it's to anyone rational and stepping outside of an emotional response can see that this woman died not of being beaten. She died of some other problem, because you don't walk normally and then die because of a beating. The video is of her walking into the police station, holding her head, and then collapsing. And that's some kind of, cardiovascular neurological problem, and she had a history of neurological problems. So whatever the details are of that, the media ran with it, turned it into this thing that the Iranian government was killing women because they weren't wearing proper clothing. It became insane, and then the airways were just packed with these lies, and some may be partially true, but almost all of them were lies in some way. And if you examine them just briefly, you can usually determine they're 100% lie, or if not 90% a lie. And so this difference in focus, one on trying to ignore a U.S.-backed authoritarian right-wing regime killing indigenous people who are trying to fight for democracy, completely ignoring that. Like, how many people in America know about Peru? Zero. How many people in America know about Iran? Almost everyone knows Iran is a quote unquote terrorist state or whatever authoritarian regime. When it's a country, it's a government that is vastly democratic. That it has vast democratic support. The people there are happy with their government, and it's not America's role to tell other people what they should be happy with. If other people want to wear things on their head, they should be allowed to wear things on their head. If other people want to do whatever, they should be. This is not, in my opinion, is not the role to be colonists, whether colonists of resources, as we're doing in Peru, or colonists of culture or ideology or people's practice, as we're trying to say we have the right to do in Iran. We have the right to tell people what to do there. And if they don't do it, we should bomb them, or we should regime change them, or whatever the subtext is. All of this disinformation, the subtext is we should take out the offending party. And the other thing that I thought about after doing this, just reading this article again for like the 20th time, is that I think a lot of people, they don't go along with these propaganda narratives. Like, I think Iranian expats, for the most part, understand that what we've written, if they read it, they would understand in themselves that, yeah, this is all lies. But we have to go along with the lie because we have to get rid of this thing we have to get rid of this evil that they view in Iran for some reason. And I think this all stems from, and you can trace it to COVID, you can trace it to any of this propaganda, is that humans instinctively, and this is probably a flaw that a lot of these intelligence agencies exploit, is that instinctively we have a greater fear of being ostracized from other people. And that makes sense because we are tribal people, in historically or prehistorically, that's how we survived. If the tribe pushed us out, we were just going to die and be eaten by the hyenas or starve to death or freeze to death in the cold. So part of the primary survival instinct of humans is to be accepted by the group. So there's this greater fear of not being accepted by not going along with the narrative, no matter how stupid it is or what kind of lie it is or how injurious it might be in terms of the vaccine or whatever. Like that you go along with this lie because you want to stay part of the group because that's survival. But we don't have the same level of fear about abstract things like economic problems we may be bringing upon ourselves in our culture or our country, or war. These are all abstractions in our mind. They're not this innate like hunger, this like base desire to be accepted, which is really a fear that's rooted in this idea of survival. Whereas we understand that, economic and political and warfare, those things could affect us, but there isn't this like immediate emotional response that this desire to be part of a group has. And I think that's a lot of what is going on. And I think Setareh and I, had we been living in prehistoric times, we would have long died or been eaten by the hyenas because we don't have this fear of not being accepted by our group. So we're able to think about these narratives in a much more rational way. And I think that goes for a lot of the people who are writing with the gray zone and alternative media, is that it's, for many people, it's just so obvious when they see a lie. But for other people, the truth of something isn't as important as the social acceptability of it. Like, they want to make sure the social acceptability of it, and it's totally subconscious for most people. They want to make sure, oh, is that something other people would believe? I don't know. And that they look at that first before they look at, is this actually what's happening? That's not as important as the survival instinct. So those are two things I want to talk about before I hand it over to you, and take it away.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly correct. How people are looking for, seeking acceptance, and their fear, being socially isolated and ostracized and everything. And I think the problem is, I mean, this fear has probably been a part of human life because as social beings, we prefer to, be a part of a group and form our identity as being part of some other community in society and everything. But the problem with our era, I think, and is that the social media creates some sort of a distorted perception of the reality. I mean, it's not necessarily that a majority is believing, for example, those things or acting in a certain way, but social media gives you the impression that the majority of the people are doing certain things in a certain way. So that's even more dangerous because you start following um, what something because you think the majority is doing that, but then when you face the reality, you either cannot understand and like grasp the reality, or you're shocked and it's like some sort of a double isolation because you were not part of it. And I mean, it's shocking when you find out that that was not the reality that you thought, and you probably go into a denial phase, and you just don't want to accept that that's the truth. This
And
is,
you attack others. You
of
fight back
course,
during that denial. You say you that, and that's that's the heat that a lot of people who are trying to tell people, no, you should look at the truth. I mean, it's the same thing if you went to someone who was in a cult and you were trying to tell them that their cult leader is taking advantage of them. They would be like, no, what are you kidding? You're kidding. No way. He's the, he's the
yeah,
best person in the world. And like, I mean, there's this like denial and then also an attack back on you. And that's because when you shatter people's illusions, like it's much easier to,
exactly.
it's much harder to like, what was that quote from Mark Twain? It's like easier to tell them, I don't know, it's like easier to it's harder to convince someone they've been fooled. Like that's like the harder thing to do. I forget the quote, but it's like when someone is really believes in a con, it's more painful to get them to realize that. Like there's this, and basically the entire world with social media is living in a giant scam right now, like on so many levels. Like there's virtually nothing that capital, and it all is all rooted in like a control, mostly for money, but sometimes for other reasons. But mostly it's a way of controlling people, for the accumulation of capital. It's an outgrowth of the capitalist system. What do you think, Keefi?
Yeah.
See Keefi.
I think she agrees. She was nodding.
Oh yeah, okay. That's good.
So yeah, I think she agrees. Yeah, that's true. And I mean, it's like personally the people that I see in that denial phase, like a lot of them are actually also, I mean, it's not only denial, they're also very sensitive to any form of injustice and like oppression and things, and they want to kind of stand up to those values that like you have to fight oppression, you have to fight injustice. But the problem is the sources where they get their information from uh, about the reality that they're actually living in are just totally they're just following some other forms of agenda. And I'm not surprised if someone who lives outside Iran, like the Iranian diaspora that has been actively involved in this disinformation campaign against Iran, I'm not surprised if some of them who have not been visiting or traveling to Iran for the past 50 years do not actually understand. I mean, they're so detached from the realities of the society in Iran that I wouldn't be like really surprised that they don't really understand what is happening. But the problem is when a lot of these people do know about them, like especially those who left the country maybe in the past 10 years or so, like they're not really that detached from the reality. They know what's happening, but like you said, they just like they want to be part of that um, like call for regime change inside Iran. So it's a political agenda. Many of them are being like paid very well to play into that. Like, for example, let's mention like Ali Nejad, which is probably the most notorious one of them. Um, I don't think that she doesn't understand the Iranian society. I think she knows very well because, for example, like her own family comes from I mean, they're from like conservative family, and they live among other people, like her mother and sister and everything. And so I'm sure or I'm almost sure that it's not that she doesn't understand. It's just that she's part of that agenda, and it makes it more difficult because as soon as you want to mention, like, they're going to say, "Well, I'm Iranian," but what is not being heard is the voice of the Iranians who actually live inside Iran. Like, um, I'm not sure how many people from inside Iran you could find online, like, whose voices have been heard. Uh, and the fact that there is a variety, like, Iran is not a monolithic society, and there is a great diversity of opinions, and everything is just totally ignored. It's the whole Iranian society is regarded as uh, like almost 90 million people hating the mullahs and hating Islam and not wanting to wear something on their heads, and everyone wants regime change and everything. And then if you fall into that trap, it becomes very difficult to, for example, understand that why and how crowds of millions and millions of people pour into the streets to attend the funeral for the popular general, or thousands to attend the pro-government rallies. And then you have to make an excuse for yourself and say, like, these people have been rented and, like, they've been promised lunch, and that's why they're on the streets, because because you have been thinking about the Iranian society as just one form of opinion, and that's like 90% maybe, or something, um, against their governments.
And that's not accidental. That is exactly bigotry. That's exactly Islamophobia. That's exactly what Islamophobia has been programmed in the West by the Zionists primarily. I mean, it's the Zionist agenda to make sure the West has the same enemies as the state of Israel, and so that they can use the West to fight their enemies like they did in Iraq. So like they've programmed it through a lot of media. I mean, there's a great documentary and educational series produced by this great guy. I can't remember his name. He came to Atlanta a few times. It's called A is for Arab. If you want to look that up, which goes through all the and there's another. He did a film called Real Bad Arabs, and it's spelled Reel, and it goes through like the Islamophobia, particularly in terms of hating Arab or producing hatred of Arabs. But Arabs and Persians are one and the same because of that same ignorant bigotry in the West. Nobody knows the difference. So they're all lumped together. But the idea is like the West, the media culture has been ingrained to produce these stereotypical characters, so that we all think of, Muslim people as like a monolithic, and then we can turn it into a terrorist campaign. And then we had the war on terror, which was basically a war on Islam. It wasn't a war. Terror is a tactic. It's not an entity. So it was shaped into a war against Islam. And so now currently in Iran, I think what we see is like a politically acceptable way of expressing this same long Islamophobic terror message, but now we can direct it specifically at the government of Iran and people who wear hijabs or whatever. And the liberal aesthetic in the West has been guided towards that because they feel, oh, it's justified because these people are misogynists, or women don't want to wear things on their head. They're being exploited instead of actually understanding the culture or living in the culture and seeing it like I have. And you understand that the women are the ones choosing to do this. This isn't driven by men. This is
Exactly.
Grandmas and mothers telling their daughters to do this because they, just like women would in America, tell their daughters to, not walk around without a shirt on. It's the same exact thing. It's just a different culture and a different understanding of what moral dress is. So we've created a entire Western culture now that can be weaponized. The cultural knowledge can be weaponized and say that other people who don't share that culture are somehow evil. And for some reason, the liberal classes, the people who are supposed to be doing good and caring for the world and caring for the environment are the ones that have been most weaponized against their very so-called like missions in the world, and their you know purpose of life, their meaning for life of being a liberal has been weaponized against them. And I think this all came from like the establishment's understanding. It was really a watershed moment of the Occupy Wall Street. It's when people came together and protested there, the establishment had to think about how to prevent this from happening again. And from that point forward, you've seen these ridiculous liberal quote unquote activist campaigns like Black Lives Matter and whatever, where it's like, yeah, there's a fraction of it which really makes sense, but then they're taken to these extents where, for example, Black Lives Matter's target was the police. It's like, so you're gonna target it's like the one part of society that's armed and ready to deal with you and like ready to, I mean, you're targeting, that is absurd. Like, you don't, like, that is a way of derailing activism and pushing it right against the the warriors of the state. Like, you push it towards the actual like culprits, like the pathetic, like pasty skinned leaders who have who those are the ones you need to start putting pressure on. But instead they were like going after police, and it's like, okay, that seems like a very poorly targeted campaign. And then you see all of this, you see everything weaponizing. I think like one of the things I hope we can elaborate on in the future is campaigns like, for example, Amnesty International or something is a great example of how you can even have campaigns which use the words of doing good, because this all of this whole psyop involves convincing people that they're doing good, they're caring about the world by actually doing something the oligarchs want that is bad and bad for them, whether it's injecting yourself with a vaccine or, I don't know, doing all this other stuff. Like, that's a great example if you understand the details on the COVID thing, because it's like people literally doing damage to themselves for no reason, other than benefiting the oligarchs. So in this case, with Amnesty, they say all the right things about Palestine. They know Palestine. They know all the bad things they're happening there. They say it in the right way. I mean, maybe not as far as they should, but they say enough of it to please people who understand Palestine. And it's really sick because Palestine is inside of Israel. So Palestine is like a contained environment. Israel basically controls Palestine. So commenting on whatever happens in Palestine does not affect the oligarchy outside, because that is a thing where nobody really wants to tell Israel what to do, and if they do, it doesn't matter because the UN never holds them accountable anyway. So Amnesty can use the suffering of these people to make it look like it's the teller of truth. It knows, it really cares about the world or whatever. And then at the same time, once it convinces you of that, and you think, oh, well, they know about Palestine, then it'll sell things like the war on Syria to you. Oh, we have to get rid of Assad because he's a butcher, which ends up de facto making you being on the side of Al Qaeda and ISIS as they ransack indigenous communities there and destroy the countryside. And where's Amnesty standing up for the U.S. getting out of 1/3 of Syria? The U.S. occupies 1/3 of Syria right now illegally. Amnesty never talks about that. The U.S. is stealing 80% of Syria's oil. Amnesty never talks about that. So they're totally part of the regime change narrative. They're totally an intelligence operation, and they really take advantage of people's goodwill, like liberal people who want to improve the world, want to help people. They weaponize that goodwill, and that's what all of this new propaganda that's happened since Occupy has done. It's like scrambled people's brains, and it particularly targets the left because it's about convincing people that doing good is the bad thing they want you to do is actually the good thing they want you to do. So with Iran, the way they do that is they convince you of all these lies that it's actually, you have to take out the quote unquote regime because look at all these bad things they're doing. The only problem is most of the bad things they're talking about don't exist. And so maybe we should get into those. And
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, like I think the most outrageous one was the one that there was this claim that 15,000 protesters were going to be executed. I mean, that number is absolutely crazy, but it looks like it doesn't matter what you just make up about Iran. It's going to have, it's going to just go viral and like, I mean, for example, the Prime Minister of Canada doesn't bother do a simple fact check before tweeting about that. I mean, he later had to remove that tweet where he claimed that Iran was going to execute 15,000 protesters. But it wasn't that because he cared about the truth. It was because he was hurting his own credit. Like, if you can make such a big lie about Iran and then everyone is going to remind you that that's not happening, then it becomes difficult for him to be trusted on anything else that he's saying. So I think that like that one was actually like really like really shocking to me, because I mean it's very difficult to say, like, how can you make that and how can you believe that? Like 15,000 protesters are going to be executed in Iran? Like 80 million people or 90 million people are going to just stand by and watch that 15,000 protesters are going to be executed? I mean, it's just so insane how you can just make up anything about Iran and then it goes viral. And that's like it's been mentioned in that article on the Gray Zone that we wrote. Some of these people never took that down. Like, and like when you tweet that and it goes viral and you have millions of followers, it's very difficult to get those followers informed about the lie that you said. I mean, it's already everywhere and you can't undo it to a great deal. Like, I'm sure, I mean, if you just Google that news, there are still people that are talking about it, how 15,000
Elijah Wood's tweet's still up. Elijah Wood,
exactly.
This, Mensa member, his tweet is still up. And I mean, I don't understand what value Twitter is for people if it's just can be used as such flippant nonsense. I mean, they are lucky, I gotta say, Elijah Wood and these others are lucky that only a small fraction of the Iranian population, like less than 10% of Iran, is on Twitter. Because if Iranians were on Twitter and Twitter represented a democratic view of Iran, these people would be ratioed into non-existence. Like,
yeah.
But
yeah. And or the case of the UN's special rapporteur on the status of human rights in Iran, that Javid Rahman, he claimed that Iranians cannot have Kurdish names and the Kurdish people are prosecuted for whatever reason. That's also another example of how so-called international community and international bodies like Amnesty International or the UN itself are so biased about Iran, and they do not even if the special rapporteur on the status of human rights on Iran for UN special rapporteur does not bother check if the claim that he's making about Kurdish names in Iran is true or not, how do you expect Iranians to, for example, be willing to allow a fact-finding commission? Like, you can't do a simple, you don't bother to do a simple fact check that you could have done on Google. And I'm sure a lot of Iranians, and you could have checked with Iranians who where is an official website where I could make sure if that's actually happening. So, I mean, this is just I personally, as an Iranian, seeing all those things happening, it makes me lose any hope in any of these international bodies, including Amnesty International or the UN. I mean, I wasn't very hopeful before, but it's just if I thought that they did not care about the truth or care about Iranians before, now I'm sure that they're just a part of. Iranians are sure that those so-called international bodies are just being used as a tool to do whatever the U.S. wants to do against Iran. I mean, this everybody knows, and everyone talks about how illegal sanctions are at the UN, but nothing happens. And the sanctions are in place, and they're hurting and killing Iranians, and nobody cares about that. So why do you expect Iranians to, for example, allow a special rapporteur or allow a fact-finding commission into the country?
Well, that's the most effective way to have an international organization achieve these means, is just to pretend like it's going to do it and then not do it, because then you buy all this time. You know, it's like the two-state solution. They just keep talking about it forever, and it just buys all this time for occupation, and the occupation continues while they pretend like that there isn't already a two-state solution. Or what I was going to say is, like, in our article, like the 15,000 lie about these, quote unquote 15,000 prisoners who are about to be executed. We go into some detail on how we speculate with, how that may have come about, because there was an official letter written between two bodies in the government of Iran that was talking about how they should ramp up some legal action against violent people who are carrying weapons and committing violence. It wasn't about protesters. It was about these pretend protesters who were actually violent thugs, most of them sponsored by external forces, whoever they may be. But there were a lot of these externally funded groups, which our previous guest, Mansoura Tajic, she really did a great job in explaining the mechanisms of how those saboteurs are funded from the outside. But in the case of the names, this weird Javid clown from the UN, how he just made up this nonsense about a particular name being banned. What we didn't speculate, but how do you think? I mean, do you think he literally is that stupid that he doesn't know how to access the Iranian official names database, or do you think he is just making it up because he wants to have a fun soundbite? Do you think someone told him to say that? Like, how do you think someone in that high of a position just comes to say nonsense? Because he got to that position saying something right. He didn't just. I mean,
I would say. Well, yeah, I think it's probably that somebody, especially from the Iranian diaspora, probably told him that's the case, and he never felt he has to check. Because I'm saying that because, like I told you, I was representing this NGO that I sometimes volunteer with at the UN last March, and I saw top MEK officials like casually hanging with the chairman of the session, or like having their cameras set up and like being attending UN sessions as some sort of Iranian oppositions. And everyone knows about MEK. I mean, MEK has assassinated over 17,000 Iranians, and they have also killed Americans. And it's a very it's a crazy cult with that has worked with Saddam's regime against Iran, for example, and that has been trained by Israeli intelligence services to carry out assassinations inside Iran, like to assassinate
in the U.S.
And in the U.S.,
currently trained in illegal bases in Syria that the U.S. has, and then they were also trained, I think, in Nebraska, was it, by Israeli trainers? Nevada, by Israeli trainers in Nevada. And this is a group that killed Americans in Iraq, and was listed as a terror organization on the U.S. list of terrorist organizations, but because they became politically useful, they took them off. And it's just like exactly how the U.S. has been giving, untold amounts of U.S. taxpayer dollars to Al Qaeda and ISIS in Syria, which are supposed to be enemies of America that kill Americans, right? So it shouldn't be just Iranians that are, disturbed by that, but it should be Americans, American patriots, American nationalists who don't like, their government or their taxpayer dollars supporting groups that have, I guess that's hard to do when America supports Israel, but groups that have, outright declared themselves as enemies of, or Americans as enemy or killed Americans, because if you just look into the USS Liberty, you already know that we're funding Israel, which has killed many Americans as well.
But the thing is, even while MEK was on the list of terror organizations by the US and EU, the training to get in together with the Israeli intelligence services in Nevada happened while they were on the list of the terror organizations. It happened.
Oh, really?
During,
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
part.
it happened. Yeah, it happened during
God
Bush's
bless.
administration. That's long ago. So
Yeah.
they were not delisted yet when they were being trained inside the US.
I wonder how many Al Qaeda and ISIS members came to the U.S. for training. I mean, there's a whole book called Visas for Al Qaeda, which it basically talks about that, how the U.S. was actually getting visas for Al Qaeda members to come live in the U.S. and get training in the U.S. So this isn't something that stopped. I'm sure the Azov battalion and these Nazi head choppers in Ukraine are also. I mean, they're touring Congress now. Like, he has Azov Nazi battalion members walking around Congress and getting hugged by Nancy Pelosi. So, like, it doesn't matter how terrible some regime is or some country, some group, some terrorist group is in the world, as long as it's doing the bidding of the U.S. government. If it does something differently, then the U.S. is going to spend, and its media lackeys are going to spend all day coming up with lies and slandering them. If they do like the U.S. wants, they come to Congress or get training and to keep the system going.
Yeah, that's true. Like Vanessa said, that I never thought we would have to at some point say or tell people that the Nazis are bad. I think that's how also a lot of us inside Iran feel about the MEK, in that this time especially we had to tell people that MEK are bad, because MEK has always been known as being the one group that is hated by all types of Iranians, opposition and pro-government. The Pahlavis, the monarchies, and the communists, I don't know, like whatever. It didn't matter what political ideology you had. If you were coming from Iran, you would hate the MEK because, as I said, they worked with Saddam against Iran. They assassinated over 17,000 people inside Iran, and they are a very insane type of cult where people cannot get out of, and they cannot get married, and they cannot make any decisions about their lives. I mean, inside that cult also, it's a very weird type of cult. But this time we're seeing them being a very powerful voice of the so-called Iran Revolution 2022, which, by the way, has been updated as Iran Revolution 2023, and it has been going on for over 44 years or so. And I don't know why it's not happening. Yes, I mean, like, they're always saying that
it should be the anti-revolution. Like, it's not a revolution.
Well,
the revolution happened in '79, right? So.
Yeah, but I mean, well, we had the Islamic Revolution in 1979, which is a popular movement, and it has been staying in power for plus 40 years. But there are, this so-called opposition outside Iran have been saying that the regime is going to collapse this time. This year is the last time, and everything for 40 years.
Close to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Wow. So we yet have to see when it's going to happen. But yeah, I mean, they are actually rebranding the MEK. I mean, they delisted the organization, I mean, from the terror list, but it didn't make them popular among Iranians because nobody has forgotten about all the things that they have done to Iranians. But this time, because, you know, they changed their name several times and they appear as, because they, I mean, they want to like kind of wash all the things away, like whitewash all the crimes that they have committed against Iranians. Um, and we have been like actually seeing people uh, among the Iranian diasporas. I mean, I'm talking about those who are actually a part of this project against Iran, not ordinary members of the Iranian diaspora that are like encouraging working with the MEK because they're saying like they know very well how to work with you know, American politicians because you know that they that's true. I mean, the MEK has been working with American politicians against Iran, but I mean, it's like a lot of people are just uh, I mean, forgetting all the things that this group has done to Iran. The same is true with Pahlavi, but the Pahlavi was, you know, I mean, it's still different from MEK. MEK is like a very um like violent and barbaric terrorist group, which is, as I said, like it has been always hated by any Iranian, no matter what they come from. But now we're seeing them being how do you say it? Yeah, I mean, presented as something very different, just as some yeah, opposition group.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that stems from the whole hysteria that everyone was whipped up into with all this disinformation. So people were willing to just ignore any of the affiliations for where the information was coming from, as long as it was saying the message that made them comfortable, which is, oh, we have to do away with this, you know, violent regime in Tehran. And as long as that message was coming out, it didn't really matter who was saying it, like, because it's like, it was such a hysterical thing, and I'm sure it's going to come back. I mean, this was just like a test run,
Yeah.
uh, and and so that's why I think calling out a lot of this terrible. I mean, it's not even good lies. That's the thing. Like, if they were like
Exactly.
clever lies, and it was like, oh, okay, maybe that it's just dumb. So like, I mean, the one we led with was that the BBC was claiming that more people died in Iran in the protest crackdown, supposedly, than died in the war in Ukraine. And then, like in the third paragraph, they specified, oh, it was just between these days in Ukraine, and then totally different days, like not related on the calendar at all, just like one group of days in one time period in Iran
Yeah.
and one group of days, one time period in Ukraine. More people happen to, and then it was saying by human rights groups, that's who reported these deaths. So we don't even know if that's the right number of deaths
What
during those
human
date
rights?
ranges at all. But they just cherry picked some date ranges, and so I wrote the end of that that section, and I said, you know, you could compare, you could use the same logic. You could say more people died in World War One, the entire war in World War One, than died. I mean, more people died in Iran on one day than died in World War One, and then later in some specific like asterisks at the bottom, you could say, oh, but we're just talking about the truce in 1914, the Christmas truce, that day where like literally I think one person died or something in the entire battle, because you're just picking a day. There's no logic in that headline. It's just a pure lie, and the BBC put it as a main headline. They knew they were lying, and they're just, I don't know.
And they know very well that the majority of the people only read the headlines, right?
Yeah.
I mean, nobody goes through the captions. I was
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
checking.
It was a total deception.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
What are you checking?
I was trying to see if I can find some statistics on, well, 70% of Americans only read headlines of articles. That's
I mean,
one
70%.
from,
Wow.
yeah, that's one from 2 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
Well, we got a lot of good headlines. What was another one? What was the one after that we did? You have the article in front of you.
Yes,
Second one?
there was also that Azerbaijani drama scene,
Oh, that was epic.
and it was, yeah, and it was the one where it said that the Iranian rock climber's house was demolished, family home was
Let's
demolished.
talk about the Azerbaijani series, because like that.
Okay.
So there were all these. So I guess J.K. Rowling is the one that brought this one to light, because she retweeted this ridiculous little video clip of this man like with his hands outstretched, like dancing in some, it looks kind of like a sad dance or something. And then as an explanation, it says, "Oh, he said he would dance. He promised his daughter that he would dance at her wedding, and but instead the mullahs killed her, and now he's dancing at her funeral." And it's like, oh, and everyone's like, oh, even the stones were crying, and it's like this whole ridiculous like nonsense. It's a total lie. It's just a clip from, I don't even know in the drama series if that's actually a portrayal of a guy dancing at it.
It's yeah, it's dancing at a funeral, but I don't know if it's dancing.
They weren't
at a
even
funeral.
creative
Yeah.
in that. They could have like
No.
they could have made some better
Yes.
improvement from the original drama script, but they didn't.
Yeah.
So it's from some dumb drama. They picked it out. They put it on. They said it's a real life video of, and there was some amazing tweets about that. If anyone wants to go look on Twitter, one that I thought was great is there's apparently in the video, like they walk through a little like driveway kind of thing, and there's a gas pipe that goes over the driveway, like a natural gas line. Instead of going under the ground, it goes over like a little arbor above the driveway. And some guy was like, the minute I saw that, I knew it was Azerbaijan and not Iran, because that's the only country in the world that I know does that. Apparently he was like an Azeri guy, and he was like, there's no way it's anywhere else. And he looked it up, and he was like, yeah, this isn't Iran, this isn't us. So it's like, they can't even get away with stuff because the internet is full of intelligent people who observe things and know people, or like they can pull this out, and it's hard to get away with it. I mean, and then we found that same clip was used to promote COVID misinformation, to say that to like promote the fear of COVID, saying that the daughter died of COVID, and then also to promote the Syria war, saying that the daughter was killed by Assad or whatever. So yeah, it's amazing, but people catch a lot of these things, just the general public, which is great. I think another one they did was that soccer player Ali Karimi was posting all these lies, and one picture he posted a guy who obviously had a horrific injury to his knee, and he was saying how this guy was injured by this like greater than 50 caliber round. He specified the exact gun that he thought injured this person, and like the wound was bad, but it wasn't that bad. I mean, if he had been shot in the knee,
it would have blown up the whole body.
He wouldn't have a knee. Like there would be nothing there. And even if the rounds just passed near his body, he likely would not be conscious. And that guy was obviously like crawling or something. So like he specified a weapon class that just is insane. I don't even know where he got the idea or where he even knows about weapons. And so he claims that this guy got shot by this Russian artillery, and then or it's not quite artillery, but a huge. I mean, we're talking about like a bullet that's like about that big. That's what he was claiming the guy got shot by, and then another guy on social media is like, "Hey, no, that dude's my friend from the next neighboring village who was in a motorcycle accident. Here's the photo I took of the guy from my phone," and it's like, so it really is like, it's great in some way that the internet has so many people who are able to pull this out. But the sad thing is all these things the Western media doesn't cover. So nobody actually knows that a lot of these lies, or most of these lies, have been debunked by the democracy, by the people just
Exactly.
responding to them. And yeah, he had a couple
Yeah.
of lies to this Ali Karimi guy, but that one was
Yeah.
super
Rest.
egregious. Because even the
Yeah.
guy who had the motorcycle injury, who had his leg amputated, who that photo was, he was like asking the Iranian government to prosecute Karimi because he had
Yes.
used the photo of him when he was injured and traumatized to try and carry out a regime change objective. So even the victim in that photo was being politically activated by the misuse of it by this.
Yeah, because it was after a few months after he was trying to get over losing his leg or in an accident that he became into like public attention, and this Karimi has over 14 million followers. This is one of the like saddest maybe part of all this disinformation campaign, because uh, I personally have always been a fan of the Iran's national football team. I wasn't a fan of Karimi, but he was a good player and he had a lot of fans inside Iran, and it's really disappointing to see that. I mean, because people understand. I mean, there are a lot of people who might not understand that he's lying about things, but people are living in Iran and they can see that how a lot of those things that he's claiming are just lies. And I mean, it would have looked like he was caring about Iranians and he might have just been misinformed about what was actually happening. But when you see that like he meets with the German president, or that he can keep saying the craziest lies about what is happening inside Iran and not stopping after people like remind him or tell him that he's not like telling the truth. This is like I mean, I think like especially Ali Karimi and a few other influencers, they had the blood of all those who were killed during the protests on their hands, because you know they were trying to fuel this anger. And I mean, these people we don't even know. We cannot know for sure what happened to these people and how many of them actually died, because like we said, like there are so many fake names. And like the one of that rapper who like we had the picture of that rapper and with a name that does not exist, and nobody knows of the funeral or the gravestone or anything. So yeah, I mean, that's really sad, because even the guy who lost his leg in the accident and whose friend was like posted that picture and was saying that this had nothing to do with the protest. He was saying that he loves Ali Karimi and he was a fan, and then adding the rest of the information. But I mean, he's going to lose those friends, obviously. And I mean, um, yeah, like he and other people who became celebrities and famous people and made a lot of money because of the support of the Iranian people are now turning their backs to Iranian people and just you know, accepting tons of money, obviously, to just play into this campaign against the Iranian nation and Iranian people. And at the end of the day, the only thing that we're seeing that these European countries or the US doing to, I mean, claiming that they're doing it for Iranian people, at the end of the day, it's just more sanctions. Like,
Yeah.
what is
Well,
happening?
they don't oppose, like, the one thing, if anyone thinks they're doing something for Iran, they should oppose sanctions. Sanctions are not doing anything good for anyone. The whole point of sanctions is attack poor people and vulnerable people to make the lowest end of society so angry that they rise up against the leaders. So it's all about killing innocent poor people. So anyone who understands should just forget about headwear or whatever cultural thing that they think the other people are doing. Because I mean, if you don't think people are free to have their own culture and do their own thing, then that's one thing. But then you shouldn't look at right wingers and say, oh, these people are bigots because they don't want to accept whatever other cultures or races or whatever, because you're doing the same thing. So if you're a liberal person and you say, oh, we got to make sure everyone around the world does the same thing and dresses the same way and does all this, then I mean, what kind of world do you actually want for your kids? It's a very boring world where everyone just basically is doing the exact same thing. I don't want that. I want people to be free to have their cultural differences and do their, I don't even,
exactly.
I mean, I don't want any standards other than like, you know, a few basic human rights issues. But if you go too far into what is human rights and what isn't, you start changing cultures, and that's not right. Like you should, you know, there's some gray area there that may be controversial, but like I really don't think that we should be, as Americans, going around the world and telling people how to live. But we certainly should be not taking food and medicine out of the mouths of children, or, you know, doing what Madeleine Albright said was a great idea, which was, you know, killing 500,000 Iraqi children by denying them food and medicine. I think that's atrocious. That if you want to talk about who's doing the worst human rights offenses, someone who has the power to feed and give medicine to and comfort to 500,000 kids versus killing them, which is what Madeleine Albright did, versus, for example, let's say there is a mullah in Iran who's like beating women so that they wear hijabs, which doesn't exist, by the way, but let's say that fantasy exists. Who do you think is doing more harm to the world? Is it the person who's killing 500,000 children because she happily, and she said it on video, happily was,
and it was worth it.
She said it's worth it, which means she's happy with her decision to kill children by keeping them from being fed and have medicine. So basic, what I would consider human rights, providing food and medicine to children, or, you know, forcing women to wear a cloth on their head. Like I don't see where there's even a comparison. Like, who the heck cares about cloths on head? I mean, if someone forced me to wear a cloth in my head, I might fight it for a bit, but then I don't care. Like, I mean, I wear this. I would probably not wear this if someone didn't tell me to do it. Like, why? I mean, it's a nice warm day outside. Why would I wear anything? So, I mean, there's some cultural, like, things that, anyway, it just drives me nuts that nobody is behind. There isn't outrage against sanctions. There's outrage against all these other nonsense cultural issues, but there's no outrage against the sanctions, which is illegal, and it's the U.S. doing it. It's not the world saying let's sanction Iran. It's the U.S.
unilateral,
pressured by Israel. Like, even if there was no Israel, there wouldn't be these sanctions. This is all pressured by Israeli nationalists within the U.S. government to sanction Iran. That's how it works. It used to be maybe the U.S. was pushing these agendas on their own, like 40 years ago. But now, because of the way the funding of Israel and the kind of trajectory has been, now it's basically like Tel Aviv writes most of the U.S., Middle East, and Eurasian foreign policy. So, yeah.
I think it's also very insulting to say, I mean, I'm sure it's insulting to a lot of Iranian women to say that they cannot do anything about their countries and they cannot work on them like independently to improve the things for themselves, and they need some help from outside, while as we know, and as the statistics show, Iranians are making up more than half of university students, and they are very active in the society.
Iranian women are making up,
Yeah. What did you say? Okay.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't hear women. I just want to make sure Iranian women are the ones that are a majority of college students in Iran. Universities.
Yes, and they were an active part of the revolution, the popular revolution that we had in 1979. So if they want to change something about their countries, they can do it on themselves. Like, they don't need help from outside. And I find it insulting that you're I mean, some of these Western countries, and especially the US, act like Iranians need help from outside to achieve their goals. You know, I mean, if the majority of Iranians want something, it doesn't matter if the government opposes that. I'm sure they will find a way to get what they want.
Iran doesn't need they need less activity from outside. That's the problem. The sanctions are what's hurting them. If the world just would leave Iran alone and let Iran do its own thing, it would be fine. But the point is, they don't want to. They want to destroy Iran, and so they do. But they do it in ways in which liberals and people who think they're good people are gonna accept, because they're like, well, I'm a good person, I choose this, I'm not a Trumper. Like, people think in these weird, simple ways where they don't think about actual implications of their activities. They just think about social acceptability. That's sort of like what I was talking about in the beginning, like this idea of being ostracized, like, leads people to do things that are just, and not do things that are just logical. I mean, most, like, if a peace group wants to promote peace in Iran, or peace really in a lot of countries now, they should just work on sanctions, because sanctions are a form of violence, and it's a form of subversive warfare that's very, very dangerous. And I don't know, what are the food, the free lunch section where we were talking about the crowds, like people in Iran. And this is the thing you just mentioned, like the revolution being spearheaded by women. I think another thing the West doesn't really understand is that the revolution in '79, it wasn't like an authoritarian takeover by mean old mullahs. It was the people of Iran rising up and ousting a U.S. dictator. So it was the throwing off of authoritarianism. Like, the now, it may have creeped back in some ways, like all governments tend to become more authoritarian over time, but the revolution in '79 was to get rid of a complete authoritarian that wasn't democratically elected, that was appointed and put into power by Britain and the U.S. So, like, the quote-unquote capital R revolution was a people's revolution in Iran. And that's really important for leftists to understand in America, because the propaganda has slowly tried to brainwash people into thinking that because a lot of leftists are anti-religion, that this is somehow an authoritarian religious regime in Iran, and it's not representative of the people, when in fact it's very representative of the people, and the people want that for the most part. So, I mean, a large portion, which is what we call a democracy, right? So that's important. But in this section of the article about the who tweeted it? Who was the one who tweeted that first? The thing about the crowds being given free lunch?
Barbara Slevin.
Slevin, yeah. So she's terrible. But anyway, she tweeted this tweet saying that basically, like, the only reason these crowds come out is because they're given free food. And that is really not only Islamophobic and insane, but it's just impossible. Like, these are huge crowds of people. These are over 1 million people in a lot of these photos. Like, these are streets and streets and streets in Iran that are just packed shoulder to shoulder with people. And there's no food available. There's no food in sight. Like, if you had that many people who actually came out because they were hungry and starving enough that you actually had to feed them something, it means you have to feed them something. And they're not going to come out for like, half a wafer. Yeah. So you have to have a lot of food. So I made an argument that, even for 100,000 people to have a small meal would be about 11 tons of food. So 11 tons of food, that's a lot. That's a couple big food trucks full and distribution. And the interesting thing about what I know about Shia culture in Iran is like the Arbaeen pilgrimage that happens in Iraq, which is attended by a lot of Iranians, and it's part of the Shia tradition, because there's a lot of Shia in Iraq as well. They give out food during the whole walk, which is about 50 miles, and it takes days. People sleep along the way, and it's a pilgrimage. So it's like any of the Catholic pilgrimage in Spain or whatever. I mean, it's a multi-day walk, and people walk it together, and it's basically all the food is paid for, all the accommodation is paid for. And you see pictures of just like copious food, people handing out food. You see nothing like that in any of the photos from Iranian pro-government rallies. It may happen occasionally in the past, but that's also because of this tradition of feeding people when they come to like religious groups or groups of people, you feed them to take care of them as a hospitality measure, as a measure of religious piety. And people obviously need to be reminded that because the Iranian government is considered part of Islam, it's part of it's like a church. It's like your government and your church are the same thing. If you do something for a government thing, it's like doing something for your religion, for your church. And oftentimes at churches there is free donuts and coffee. And it is an absurdity to say that Americans, even though it may be true with some people, go to church for the donuts and coffee. But maybe few for a handful of people, but it's not true for the vast majority. That's not the scam that churches are pulling. They're not pulling here's some donuts and coffee, give me 10% of your income scam. That it wouldn't work. If so, Dunkin' Donuts would have a cross on top of it. It doesn't. That's not the scam. So anyway,
as I we have talked about this, I have attended for example, the Al-Quds rally the last Friday of Ramadan, which is a rally in support of Palestine, and it's considered some sort of a pro-government. It's because it's organized by the government usually. Rally, and there's also the one on the anniversary of the revolution, the 1979 revolution, that a lot of people take this to, and I have attended those two in annual rallies previously, and it's actually a time when people find it the best chance to sell things, because there is a large crowd of people and they have been walking for a long way, so it's the best time for you to sell, I don't know, ice creams, or on Al-Quds Day, because it's Ramadan, there's nothing being served, but the other one on the anniversary of the revolution, you see a lot of people selling stuff, including sandwiches, ice cream, I don't know, all sorts of food and snacks and treats along the way, because as I told you, there's a huge number of people coming out. So it's as someone who has seen those rallies and knows people who attend those rallies, pro-government rallies, I find it really ridiculous, and coming from a total lack of understanding the Iranian society, or in many cases it's just deliberate lies that are being told about Iranians. So like you said,
it's very
both
easy to convince Americans that it's to delegitimize the protest by saying, oh, these are just, starving masses of desperate people who are just, oh, please, may I have a bit of falafel? It's a pathetic, Islamophobic, disgusting trope. It may come from the fact that a few journalists way back around the revolution witnessed food being shared at protests, and that, even though, it happens here. If we have an anti-war protest or we have whatever protests, people will share water. Some people will bring something out and share it with each other, because it's what humans do. It's not, nobody goes to those things, stands out in an uncomfortable street. Exactly. And to underscore that, I think the last line of our article has a link to this pro-government protest that happened in the middle of a blistering snowstorm in Iran. And people came out, the same number of millions of people came out to support the government. And I didn't see hot chocolate or whatever being served, or some kind of hot wine juice drink like they would serve in Northern Europe to get people out in the cold. There was no coercion there, and it's very uncomfortable to be outside. So it's just infuriating.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, the ones that we worked on in that article are just very few examples of all the things that are happening. And I'm sure if we were to make a list, we would make a very, very long list.
Well, we have
Of
another 10
all
or
the
so.
lives.
I hope we can write those up
Yeah,
too. They're good.
yeah. Hopefully we can. But I mean, like, um, yeah. I think when you see that the anti-Iran front feels the need to lie about the things that are happening inside Iran, it makes you doubt about. I mean, doubt everything else that you hear. It should make you doubt everything about everything else that you hear about Iran, because if something was actually, I'm not saying that everything is okay or nothing is happening, but I'm saying if you have enough proof and evidence of what you're claiming is happening inside Iran, then why would you need to make lies about that? Like, why do you have to exaggerate, or why do you have to just make up stories? I mean, just talk about the things that are actually happening if you want to, I don't know, inform people of the word about it. And I think that's a clear example of how the Western media and the manipulation campaign is aimed at dehumanizing Iran and delegitimizing the political system. And as you said, it's full of Islamophobia, and it doesn't have to be like very explicit form of Islamophobia. When you're saying that, for example, the people who are attending the pro-government rally are starving and they come out for food, and then you have the image of those people as being looking more conservative types of society, or I don't know, like talking about progress or women's like freedom and progress, and then showing pictures of women in bikinis rather than talking about, for example, how many women are attending colleges, how many women are entrepreneurs, or I don't know, like doing different jobs inside Iran. These all includes Islamophobia, and there is a strong form of otherization of a nation that then needs a savior to come and save them from these mullahs that are oppressing them, and they have no power to save themselves, and we have to go and bring them democracy and women's right and everything.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it. That's a good summary of the implications of this kind of disinformation. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on this episode. And I must say, if anyone has ideas for more disinformation topics that you haven't heard or read in that article and you think are like outrageous, please leave them in the comments, and we will be sure to read them and respond. So thanks again for everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again in the next episode.